As I mentioned, my name is Andres Estrada, curator of public engagement. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have artist Jaishri Abichandani, who's in the third floor exhibition here at Craft Contemporary right now. And we have the pleasure of having Anuradha Vikram, who is our guest curator for this exhibition. Thank you both so much for being here. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to Anu.
Welcome everyone to Jaishri Abichandani, Flower-Headed Children. This exhibition has been 3 years in the making, and it has transformed multiple times. Honored to have the opportunity to curate the work of Jaishri Abichandani, who is both an important artist of South Asian origin in the United States, an important feminist artist, and she also is an important organizer and community creator whose ability to bring together different strains of the South Asian community, feminist community, LGBTQIA community, and other activist communities is ongoing and unparalleled. So it was through her organizing work that I first was introduced to Jaishri. And since that time, I've had the pleasure of getting to know her photographic, painting, and sculptural work as well. And every element of her practice is entirely infused with her personality, her values, her instincts, her cultures. And I just delight in being able to tell people about it. So that's what we're going to do today. I will lead the tour and Andres will follow me on camera. And periodically we'll have Jaishri embellish or explain certain aspects of the exhibition. Then she and I will have a conversation that we welcome you all to join. So please think about what questions you have for Jaishri. She's been working for over 20 years, which is hard to believe because she's ageless. And so I'm pleased to show you what amounts to almost 20 years of her artistic practice overall. The earliest works in this show are from 2005, and the newest works are from 2022. So we are extremely excited to be able to bring her work to Los Angeles. I don't think anybody in LA has ever seen anything like this before. I'm not sure anyone's ever seen anything like this before. And so we know it won't be the last time, but it's very exciting. This is a major event for Jaishri because it's the first time that so much of her work has been presented in one place. And she's had the ability to create an entire environment that aligns with the kind of experience she wants people to have with her work. I'd also like to add that as a curator, working with Jaishri, who's also an experienced curator, has been a great delight because she has this ability to think about space, people's experience about space that is very rich. And so I've gained and learned a lot from working with her on her own work, and I'm excited that we'll come up with other ways to work together in the future. So with that, let me start by explaining a little bit about the title of this exhibition. And I think the work we're standing in front of, which is called Endgame, is a good place to start. So Jaishri started making sculpture, I want to say around 2015. Is that right, Jaishri? No, earlier.
It's 2013 that I began.
2013.
Yeah, with the
Great,
Before
great.
Kali series. I mean, I had been doing sculpture when I went into grad school, but I was using a lot of assemblage and working with found objects, and I made the switch from working with found objects to just sculpting from scratch in 2013, and really just committed to sculpture in that way in that year. But I had made sculpture for a few years prior to that.
Thank you. So this work was one of the big works that she made. And of course, I'm going to forget dates because I'm not looking at things right. This is one of the challenges. I go free rogue like this. But this work is really important because it's the first work that Jaishri made that was fully in the round. So she mentioned the Before Kali sculptures, and you can see behind her in the studio the wonderful abortion goddess work, the Shrine to the Abortion Goddess, which was one of the works that we were unfortunately not able to bring for this exhibition. So it's nice that we get to feature it here. So this whole body of work dealing with deities and sculptural forms related to actually pre-Hindu deities. In this case of Before Kali, it was about looking at the really early origins of belief and goddess worship in South Asian cultures, and then bringing them into a contemporary paradigm through Jaishri's own self-expression. And those works were really important to the conception of this show. Ultimately, we decided that it didn't make as much sense to bring them as it did to bring some of the later works where she felt that her ideas that had originated in that series had come to fruition in a more robust way. So I can't show you before Kali, but maybe actually, Jaishri, you could grab one for the Q&A. I do think that there are a number of works here, particularly these lovely pearlescent works that we'll get to, that relate materially to the before Kali sculpture. So this just gives you a sense of kind of where we started out. And what a treat, by the way, to be able to do this with the exhibition here in LA and the studio in Brooklyn. So you really can see everything. So originally when we planned the show, we proposed it to the museum in 2018-19, and we were invited to do the show for July 2020 opening date. Of course, COVID happened and we had to postpone. And what ended up happening was that Jaishri made a lot of work in the quarantine period. She had a studio outside the home, actually for the first time, and she was incredibly productive. Her work got bigger and more ambitious. And so we're delighted that we were ultimately able to bring you some very new work from her that was actually created in the time in between when we would have opened and when we ultimately did open in January of 2022. And this is, of course, the great benefit of working with a living artist, which I have to say, it's always such a great privilege and treat to work with an artist's work and with them, and to get to support them in such a direct way that I can see bear fruit for years to come. So you're all getting to see the gorgeous objects that are in Jaishri's studio, which were not able to come to LA. But now I want to bring your attention back for a moment to the end game, so that I can explain why we titled the show what we did. And actually, it's good that you just showed us the CAA protest work, Jaishri, because I'll use that to explain why this show is called what it's called. So I approached Jaishri and said, what do you think about calling the show Lotus-Headed Children? And she said, no. And I was surprised because there are lotuses in a lot of the works, a number of the works, and there are lotus heads in 2 of the works. And so I asked her, well, why? And she said, well, because the lotus has become associated with the political party in India, the Hindu right party called the BJP. And so she did not want her show to give the impression that that was something that she was aligned with. And of course, I was in agreement with that. I want to mention that Jaishri and I are both descended from refugees of the 1947 partition. The region that Jaishri is from in Sindh, and the region that my father's family is from in Punjab, were both divided in 1947. Part went to India, part went to Pakistan, and our families, which in our cases are both Hindu families, were displaced. But I want to make the point that Muslim families were also displaced by this demarcation, right? And it created a rupture on the South Asian subcontinent that we're still reckoning with now, 80 years later. So this is why Jaishri and I both agreed that we didn't want our show to give the impression that we were aligned in any way with the BJP, because we feel that that's a political party that's been stirring up a lot of the same hurtful wounds, basically reopening wounds that our families have been very much affected by.
To say one quick thing, Anu.
Yeah, please. Mm-hmm.
Which is that there is a difference between Punjabis and Sindhis in that Sindh was not divided. It went entirely to Pakistan. And so Hindu Sindhis who, like myself, grew up, have all been raised in the diaspora, and my family, yes, the refugee, we are the descendants of refugees. And the way in which that translates in my own work is that the Before Kali series references sculptures from the Indus Valley, from Sindh, which as someone growing up in India and raised in America, I don't have any access to whatsoever. And the only time I've ever visited my ancestral homeland was in 1999. So the ways in which that rupture kind of exists really is an unreckoned intergenerational trauma that I think that so many South Asian families just haven't reckoned with at all.
I agree. So I actually haven't talked about this aspect of our backgrounds or your background in the tour yet, and it's actually the first time it's come up. But I do think it's important. I think it's really important. Because I think a lot of people don't understand history, just like they don't understand the immigration history that didn't allow people from South Asia to immigrate to the United States until 1965. So this is all news to a lot of Americans who would not have the historical background to immediately understand the dynamics that are at play in the work in that way. And so I want to make sure that it's really clear in this talk, because it is a little bit of a political education. And I say that as someone who's born in the United States and raised in the American education system. It wasn't really something that we talked about. It was something I learned about at home. So to give you that context, in Endgame, we see this woman who is both birthing and wrestling with this monster, if I may call it a monster. I'm not sure I should even give that kind of characterization to it, but this opponent, which is a bull-headed opponent, and of course the cow is another often used symbol of the Hindu rite. And so she's stomping on the lotus here. Her feet are on the lotus, which in Hinduism, putting your feet on anything is considered either disrespectful, like my parents always told me, don't put your feet on books. But also when you go to pray, God symbolically puts his feet on your head. So it's also a way of her saying that she's a greater deity than this deity, this right-wing deity. So I would think that is so wonderful and poetic. I want to just start there and explain sort of the tension, right? The wonderful productive tension that this work embodies, and that also characterizes the show and Jayshri's practice as a whole. So ultimately, we decided on flower-headed children, because in fact, the flower head, which I think is the next one that we'll go to, is Holy Family. The flower head represents the creative child. So in that sense, flower-headed children is actually a name that she's given her own, both characterized when they are artists as women who have children, who have families, are often mischaracterized as being less committed to their artistic practice. We often hear this in school. We frequently hear it in professional settings, that art is one of our hobbies, our pastimes, but our true passion and our true calling is the quote unquote natural work of childcare. So again, the politics of this work, this is a woman who is giving birth. And when we give birth in this culture, we reckon with some positive and some negative dynamics. And when you give birth to a male child, that's heightened. So it makes me think a lot about how motherhood is not viewed as the creative act, the divine creative act that it truly is. And I think in Jayshri's work, we frequently see these divine mothers. On the other hand, when divine motherhood is portrayed, it's portrayed in an idealized manner. And there's nothing idealistic about the deities here. And so that's really important, that this is work, that it is real, right? That it is not perfect, and that it is ultimately an invitation to take these struggles on ourselves. So that's how I read this work. And it sets us up for a number of the works that are in this immediate space that deal with parenthood and also queer identity. So I'm going to talk about those next. So these three vitrines contain newer objects. The stupa and the various goddess figures here are works from 2021 and 22, or even 2020, Jaishri? Do you remember?
Yeah,
no, I think they're all 21.
Sorry, the stupa is from 2020. And in fact, the themes of complicated motherhood run through all of the sculptures in the section that you're in. The stupa work that you're looking at right now, it really is my mother. Like, it's a two-headed figure where the face that faces you is the human face, and the face that the Janus figure, the face that's behind, is the tiger face, the more kind of violent, destructive side that she doesn't show everyone. And this it goes back also to the endgame sculpture where we began, where there are these multiple narratives embedded within all of these sculptures, where the endgame, the mother represents nations that give birth to these toxic leaders like Modi and Trump, and the struggle that we encounter when we are then faced with these fascist leaders. But then the mother also represents the planet Earth, and we are the beasts together with all of the animals who are on this brink of climate catastrophe. And so along with that is the own narrative of my conflict with my mother. So often within the works, mythology becomes a utensil for me to talk about the feminist things, which is the personal is political, where all of my personal struggles are reflected within culture, within nation states, within what we experience as humans on the planet. And I kind of end up through the work becoming porous, if you know what I mean.
So next to these works, which are again very recent works, is actually one of the oldest sculptural works, which is the diamond at the meeting of my thighs. And of course, the theme is the same. It's differently executed, but this is to indicate that throughout Jaishri's sculptural work, these same concerns recur in a variety of forms that were always complicated and never idealistic, but always venerate the female form and the power that people who can give birth, people of any gender who can give birth, have an incredible power that should be respected and valued, and often is not. And again, as I said, often is used actually as an excuse why people who have the physical capacity to give birth or the social capacity to give care are devalued in other areas of their practice and experience, and treated as though that work that they do is unworthy of recognition because it's somehow natural. And so there's a very strong element of protest in these beautiful works that luxuriate again in pleasure of looking, of the body, of sensuality. At the same time, they very much invite you to be a more active opponent of sexism and fascism where you find it. I do want us to take a quick look over here at Holy Family, just because it is the first work that presents the lotus-headed baby. And I think, for that reason is in some ways one of the hearts of this show. Perhaps like a cow, it has 4 hearts, right? How many hearts? Cats have lots of stomachs. Who has lots of hearts? I don't remember. I'm a curator and not a scientist. So this wonderful piece, of course, shows queer families and idealized without idealizing the notion of the nuclear family. Because here you have the baby and the parents, but you also have the creative practice, which gets equal place in the family and is equally nurtured. And of course, like any child, it will grow and it will ultimately love you back. So that, I think, is really profound and beautiful. Jaishri talks a little bit about being influenced by the idea of absolute pleasure and leisure that comes from Fragonard, the Baroque painter. And I also sometimes think about the divine garden of Krishna called Vrindavan, where he, especially as a child, is often shown sitting at leisure on a swing. So why not enjoy this leisure, right? We are strong against the currents of fascism, and at the same time, we enjoy the pose of royal ease, right? That's what I think is so wonderful about Jaishri's work, is that it can span all of these possibilities. From here, we are now in the queer heaven section of the show, which is in many ways my favorite section. We hope that this part of the show in particular feels like a warm embrace from a loving mother who has birthed many queer babies and continues to care for that community. Queer parenting is different if you're parenting queer children, if you yourself are queer and a parent. If you are queer and you don't have biological children, you can still very much be a queer parent. The lineages of queer parenting are about memory, oral history, collective care. And so those values we really feel we want to embody in this show. So another one of the works that Jaishri made that was a breakthrough in terms of being very much in the round was this wonderful figure, the Crescent moon goddess. which I think is one of everybody's favorites that I've met in this show. I don't want to prejudice you, of course. They're all favored children, but this one has a wonderful power of being very much in themselves. And I feel like I've learned to be more in myself by looking at this work as well. This beautiful painting in the background is the newest work in the show. It was made on site for the exhibition with the help of our wonderful installer, Ro. And Jaishri created this shortly before the exhibition opened, and she asked if she could add it, and she built this whole installation around it. It's just gorgeous, as you can see. It's done in gold paint on this royal blue background. And of course, these lovers are surrounded by stars. So the utopia is very strong in this section. And it also, again, unifies the newest work in the show with some of the oldest works in the show, but the Holy Family, which is one of the earliest sculptural works, and these beautiful portraits of two performers, Zayn and Bijli, whom Jaishri chronicled in 2005. And if I remember correctly, this was at 2004. So these photographs were printed, I think, in 05. But these events were Cholet events, is that correct? Where they were performing? So do you want to talk a little bit about Cholet and the LGBTQIA plus South Asian scene over the decades?
Yes, absolutely. So I have had the pleasure of being in community with South Asian queer folks since 1992. And I think that there have just been so many queer folks who've been in community and sisterhood and on the board of Saucy with me, including Ashu Rai, who is a DJ and one of the co-founders, along with Rajesh and Atif of Cholet Events, which is a queer South Asian production company, which has been in existence for over 20 years. It was founded shortly after September 11th to create a safe space. And it's a community in which I have, found love and refuge and shelter and camaraderie and pleasure and safety. And, as a queer survivor myself, it was, when I was shooting the images and making the videos, there was a certain way in which folks were kind of identifying, and that identification seems to have changed a lot over the generations. And so I think very much of the ways in which the videos and the photos are looking at the sculpture of the moon goddess, and the moon goddess really embodies this new non-binary way of being queer, which didn't exist when I was making the work in 2004 and 5. And it tracks kind of the evolution and the dialogue within the queer community itself, if you know what I mean. And so Bijli is someone who I was always in love with. I loved the way she dances and the way that she sings. And so I have these multiple images and videos of her. And when I worked at the Queen's Museum, I would have her come and perform at the Queen's Museum. And when I got married, Richard and I couldn't decide on a first dance. So we had Bijli do the first dance, and she brought our entire family and community out onto the dance floor for us and danced with us. So she's really someone who's important to me. And I wanted to open the show with her because she's kind of an icon in our community and deserves that kind of space and visibility.
Fantastic. And this is a good opportunity for me to talk too about how Jaishri has had so many collaborators throughout the years. So on making this film of Bijli, which you can hear her singing, and it infuses the whole show with a wonderful, wonderful tone. And to just acknowledge, one of the things that I think has been so beautiful, Jaishri, is how people have come to this exhibition who have known you for many, many years through organizing work and artistic organizing and production. And this is not easy work, nor are we an easy community. not everybody is best friends with everybody. And certainly in looking at Jasmine Blooms at Night, it's been we're going next, by the way, folks. So it's been wonderful to see how many people from the South Asian community recognize people in the paintings and how excited they are to see that representation, because even if it's not a painting of them, it's a painting of them. And at the same time, I think what's been so beautiful is that a few people have come who've worked with you on some of these projects, and maybe they've hinted that, well, we didn't always get along, so, hunky dory, and I don't know, maybe she wouldn't credit me. And I always said, no, that's impossible. Did you do the work? If you did the work, I guarantee you have credit. And every time someone has sort of made that suggestion, we've come to the work that they worked on, and there they are, proudly displayed and credited. And that's so important. And I just wanted to, again, speak to how your values infuse every aspect of this exhibition. So we've talked about the queer values, the values of alternative parenting, non-hierarchical parenting, that you've had to undo in your own self and that you've committed to in raising your own child. And then, of course, I think actually let's go to Pramila first because of this relationship. So this wonderful image of Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal and her gender norm conforming child, Janak, was originally posted as a photograph on Congresswoman Jayapal's Instagram. And Jaishri looked at the image and she thought how rare it is to see a South Asian mother, a mother of South Asian descent, be so wonderfully embracing of her queer child. And she called, Jayapal, I understand it, captioned this image Mama's Heaven. So this is where the title of the work comes from. Of course, it's such a gorgeous painting, and it's an enlarged approach to the smaller portraits that you've been doing in Jasmine Blooms at Night. So the 50 works in Jasmine Blooms at Night, of which we have 45 here, all similarly commemorate significant women and femme-identified and trans-identified members of the South Asian diaspora here in the United States and Canada, who have done meaningful activist work on behalf of our communities. And some of them are also artists, but it's not to highlight artists, it's to highlight activists and their commitment over the years to making things better for our community, which again is multiple communities and also is very much impacted by not being visible as a single community to itself or to others. But it's been a really interesting time actually to be a South Asian diaspora person in the United States since 9/11, as you mentioned, when Sholay events got started, right? We've all been looking for a safe space. It has actually caused us to come together. All of these people have been creating those spaces. Many of them are known locally. Many of these people are LA or Southern California based. Jaishri mentioned Ashu Rai, who I think we're coming up on in the blue here. And there, the academic next to her is Arundhakar, right? Anjali Arundhakar is their name, right? Who got their name, which is UC Santa Barbara. Am I correct? Right, we have people from UC Santa Barbara coming later today, actually. So and hopefully they'll be excited to see them. And so we have all of these wonderful organizers, activists. Again, there are 45, so I can't go through them all. Jaishri, of course, has also included herself, which is absolutely right. And there's a guide. So if you come to the show, or we can probably put, maybe Holly, you could put the link in the chat for folks to see the PDF of the map of Jasmine so they can see the bios of everybody that we did along with later. So to bring it back to Jayapal, whose painting follows on the Jasmine series, she's had an outsized impact with respect to South Asian Americans. So her painting is a bit bigger. But also, again, it's to really foreground this idea that this is the kind of South Asian mothering and mother-child relationship that we want to see and that we want to create in our own families, our biological families, our families of choice. So this, I think, is so important because it's the kind of representation that we do not get. And that's, I think, one of the keys to this exhibition, that Jaishri makes work that is the sort of representation she isn't seeing And we want ultimately this to be a show that represents how we would like our community to be, as opposed to how it might see itself or how it might be. So it's not to flatter the communities that we're a part of, but to hold up the best examples and really try to encourage what we want to see in, again, what is often a very ill-defined and uncohesive group of communities with very different interests from multiple different countries, especially post-partition. And then, of course, with the 1967 independence of Bangladesh, there are more countries that make up part of the South Asian diaspora. There are many different religions. We have people who are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, as well as Hindu, as well as non-religious. And we have indigenous communities. We have communities who have been discriminated against by caste on a hereditary basis going back thousands of years. And these are all divisions within the South Asian organizing groups that we just have to address in order to overcome them. So it's not without difficulty, it's not without conflict in any way. This is a utopia, so everybody's more or less getting along here. But we wanted to envision how it could be and how we think it should be. Again, so that's really the purpose of Jasmine Blooms at Night. There are other works in this section that we can close on before we move to the next area, and those are the portrait of Mona Eltawi and the two tongue works here that are, again, sort of looking at the other side of this, the harder side of it, perhaps, which is both the difficulty of being judged and the willingness to refuse to be judged, which I think Mona really embodies. Mona was very upfront about her being sexually assaulted during her covering the uprisings, the Arab Spring in 2011 in her native Egypt. She refused to be bullied by right-wing or patriarchal forces, and this inspired Jaishri, along with the Me Too movement. This inspired Jaishri to come forward about her own experiences of sexual assault and abuse, which one section of the exhibition gets into further. So we will get into that more, but we want to first just point out this wonderful spirit of defiance that Mona embodies with the lions. And also the halos. I forgot to mention the halos, but there are halos all through the show. These wonderful circular forms. So the circles, the diamonds, right? They all have significance. These are meaningful shapes. These are formal allegories. So this work is representational, but it's not only representational, it's simultaneously representational and conceptual. It carries so many layers. And there's a lot of commentary here about Western aesthetics and the value that we continue to place on Western aesthetics, even in our supposedly multicultural and inclusive contemporary art world, where the value of an artwork is based on to what degree it does not stimulate passions. But we come from a culture where art is intended to stimulate passions in order to teach us lessons about how we use our passions a lot of the time. So this work, as I like to say, really invites voluptuous looking, and it is all about visual pleasure. So in this space, we can now move to Kamala's Inheritance and the Goddess of Resistance, which again, fan favorites, I would say. Let me back up just slightly so we get the sun this way. Great, thank you. Hi, so this is Kamala's Inheritance, and it's this whole actual installation. These two works were created by Jaishri first, these two sculptural works, to respond to the campaign and ultimately the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the US presidency and vice presidency, respectively. So Kamala, who has both Hindu and Indian upper caste heritage and also African American via Jamaica heritage, has ultimately represented herself as someone who stands for that pluralism, that multiculturalism that I spoke of. And yet her ascendancy to power has also shown us what the limits of that representation can be. And so rhetorically, as well as formally, this work responds to that call and those limitations. What does representation get you, right? It gets you, in this case, someone who is often aligned with the most neo-colonial elements of the two marginalized groups that she comes from, instead of understanding how the condition of the groups that she comes from is the condition that she needs to improve. So she favors, for example, policing when she was, the attorney general or the San Francisco DA. And of course, I was in San Francisco back then, I've been living in California all these years. So I feel very much, aligned with this work and its commentary. Also, Kamala has not been a vocal opponent of the Hindu right, and she does not come from a marginalized background within the scope of her Indian heritage or her South Asian heritage. In fact, quite the opposite. So this complication, something that Jaishri wanted to respond to. So I will speak for her for a moment to say that she told me that the eagle represents the American eagle, and that this sunset that we're seeing with the Sri Yantra as the sun, which is the divine symbol of feminine energy, represents the sunset of American imperialism, which I think we would both like to see. Not that we would like to see it replaced with the Russian version, by the way. But I also was thinking about, actually, I think I kept saying it was Garuda, but it's Jatayu. Is that it? It's Jatayu. It's the wing cut off. So there's this Hindu mythology also that deals with an eagle and the wing getting cut off, and somehow her spears flip back. And as diasporic artists, it is a form of code switching to build all of these references on top of one another again into the work. So they're not strictly representational in the sense that they can be read any one way. They are actually to be read in a multiplicity of ways. But ultimately, this is about being an American.
So
not only Kamala Harris, but us as well.
You can see the broken right wing there, which prevents the eagle from taking off. And to the left of it, the head hanging in shame, the lotus head hanging in shame because of all the violence that's being done in the name of Hinduism. And the blue that begins with the lotus that refers to the blue of the gods turns into the blue of the American flag with the stars literally painted onto the body.
Do you want to tell us about the Sri Yantra as well?
No, I'm okay. We can keep going. The Sri Yantra.
We keep going. Okay, let's get a nice shot of that, and then a shot of the goddess of resistance, who I don't think really needs any explanation.
Exactly.
Particularly in the context of what we've just discussed.
Yeah, I do want to say one thing with the goddess of resistance. I was like really like this close to rendering her like this. So I might still do it. I didn't do it in that one, but it might have to happen in another one. Yeah, I didn't quite make it to that. I kept it at that, but even in this, it's like it's the peace sign, but it's also fuck you. So I like the ambiguity of that. But the other fist is the Black Power fist, which I wanted to be unambiguous.
So let's just quickly come back to the Sri Yantra, just because I wanted to point out the painting reference. So Jaishri mentioned also that there is a semicolon form here, which of course is also the female genitals, and it comes from, was it Joyce Kozloff?
No, it's from Mira Shore's.
Who is the painter?
It's from Mira Shore's.
Mira Shore. Okay, thank you.
Semicolon on TV is the name of the painting, and she had posted an image of that iconic painting of hers, and I was really so taken with the brevity and the complexity at the same time of that work. So I quoted it within the Sri Yantra, and she knows that it's an homage to her.
And I think that's just wonderful. Again, it's referring to the generations and the many different lineages and histories that you see yourself as being part of. And again, I think that's really important in the context of art movement and a feminist art movement that had a huge amount of support in Los Angeles and a huge amount of impact even to today. So although I think she's a New York-based artist, I do think that her presence
was actually
is really significant here.
Sorry, I think she was part of Woman House, and I know Woman House has an exhibition on right now. And just
yes, that's right.
That very
exactly.
quickly, that when I had curated Saucy's 15th anniversary show at the Queen's Museum, I had based the entire installation of that exhibition off the red toilet in Woman House and made a very clear link between that red toilet along with this other exhibition that I had seen in London at the Tate Britain called Thin White Line, which was actually an exhibition of artists from the Black and Asian movement, the women artists, feminist women artists from the Black and Asian movement in the UK in the 80s. And so like her stories, which was a 15th anniversary exhibition of Saucy, ended up referring to both Woman House and these Thin Black Lines exhibitions, like two very iconic feminist exhibitions.
So the last work in this main space, oh, I'm sorry, the second to last work in this main space, but we'll conclude on the two boys, I think, when we come around. This work is The Alchemist. So this is actually one of the more recent works in the exhibition as well. So the newest works, again, sculptural works, are Kamala's Inheritance and this work, The Alchemist, of the large-scale works. So this sculpture is dedicated to the memory of Jaishri's good friend and fellow organizer of South Asian activists, Dr. Anantha Sudhakar, who passed during the coronavirus quarantine period from cancer, I think at the age of 50, fairly young, yes? So this was a close friend of Jaishri's and also someone who had supported many South Asian women through their scholarship and publication of their first books, and who in her own time had not completed a book and published it under her own name. So Jaishri decided to intervene and to give her posthumously in memory the book that she never had before, and also to resurrect her as a phoenix, as a sense of rising from the dead. So this figure has definitely, again, been one of the favorites, definitely one of the favorites of the students and volunteers who helped us to install. And it also has a wonderful sensory element that I regret that many of you cannot experience. So Andreas and I will smell it for you. And that's the delightful scent that was created by Bharti Lalwani, who's a friend of Jayashri's and mine, and a perfumer, artist, and art critic in Pune, India. So Jayashri, do you want to say anything about The Alchemist or Dr. Sudhakar before we move on?
Yeah, so Ananta was on the board of Saucy with me, and she joined the board after having witnessed several years of Saucy meetings as a staff person at the Asian American Writers Workshop, where Saucy has been housed from its inception. And she was really a stellar organizer and board member in that she just always came with utmost positivity and a smile and great ideas, great follow-up. She would do anything and everything, and she just never had any drama. And she helped 17 people get their PhDs before she passed, and she was the head of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. And from the East Coast to the West Coast, like, her impact was felt by us all over. And there are so many others who were closer to her. I can't claim anything except a professional admiration. And she was my colleague, and I named my son after her. His name is Zenith Kailash Ananta Wilson. And I think she exemplified the best of us. And I thought so much about an alchemist who worked so hard on transmuting this material that they turn into gold themselves. And that is really who she was. I don't know what else to say. That I think we all know people who have dedicated their entire lives to the quest for social justice and deserve to be celebrated. And she is someone who will never be forgotten. Her work lives on, whether she wrote a book or not. And if you turn around, you'll see in the book the figures of 3 women and a little skull and a baby, because it brought so many of us together around the country who mourned her so deeply, her loss so deeply, and feel it still.
This makes me think about how you work as an alchemist yourself, and how the sculpture itself is situated in the space, which is also gold, which was Jaishri's request. And the use of the gold and the royal blue was very much intentional. The blue is the color that accompanies jasmine blooms at night, has been used in every installation of the work, although the sculpture, the shapes of the installation always change. And then the gold, which really just changes the character of the space. That makes it just so distinctively yours. But it also refers to the fact that, yes, you're an alchemist too. So, again, it's just been such a privilege to be able to bring your work here to the Craft Contemporary. We have a little bit more to walk through. So what I would like to do, though, is what I usually do is I talk a little bit. Maybe you can just frame me right here with the video. And this is a good spot to just explain. So in this space, I treat it a little bit like a mausoleum, frankly. I don't like to talk inside this backspace because there's a lot of very strong power dynamics, and there's a mourning, there's a grief, there's a rage that is in play, and I don't necessarily want guide how people respond to or experience that. So I'll just say that this backspace is where Jaishri addresses her own experience of sexual assault at the hands of India's most prominent photographer, Raghuveer Singh, through public actions, protest works, through sculpture, and through video. And maybe would you like to talk a little bit about why we made this space, Jaishri?
It's the hardest space to talk about, but because it's making myself so utterly vulnerable, but at the same time, so gratifying to put the sculpture of my rapist on display right next to the protest that we mounted outside his exhibition. I don't really want to talk about it anymore. I don't have the capacity. I'm sorry.
No need to apologize. I think the installation says everything that we need to know. So this is in response. The one protest that we see in the video is the action that Jaishri organized outside of Raghuveer Singh's posthumous retrospective at the Met Breuer in 2018. And there's another protest work which was organized outside the Indian consulate that was in 2013. Yes, 11. When there was the very awful, but unfortunately not at all exceptional, very violent assault and rape and murder of a young woman named Jyoti on public bus in New Delhi, which shocked and appalled everyone, every woman in New Delhi, every South Asian diaspora woman. And frankly, very little has changed. So we continue to protest, and in this room, active protest is eternal. So there are some older works in this space as well. There's this video, which is a 2005 moving image work, and you can start walking through. And I think it's a little bit hard to perceive just how moving the video actually is in the space, but it is a kind of almost a prayer called Happily Never After. The works that you see here on the wall are the whip drawings made with bullwhips, leather bullwhips, studded with Swarovski crystals. This one's called No Way Home, and the other one is called Heartland Edition. So both of these works also deal with the complicated interplay of sexuality, politics, and violence. Then we have the angry ladies who are staring down and amplifying the protests that we see on the videos, with their energy directed, again, directly at the sculpture of Jaishri's rapist, who will have to, for the duration of this show at least, be held accountable for his crimes.
The Freedom Safety Now video is from 2013, And there were 80 saucy members who participated in that protest outside the Indian consulate. And the protest against my rapist happened in 2017, and 30 people joined me for that. That was a silent protest because I felt that we didn't really owe anyone our stories, and we owed ourselves some protection if we were going to stand in public and let people know, me too. I'm really grateful to Anu for choosing and including these works, because I feel that with the inclusion of these works, the show is just really a true reflection of who I am and the life that I've lived in the community that I've lived. And when we talk about community being complicated, I met Raghubir in this safe, so-called safe, progressive South Asian space and community. And the reason I trusted him was because he was part of it. I met him in the home of someone who I thought was a South Asian feminist. And the truth is that we still have predators in our midst, and I don't want anyone else to, I mean, I'll just stop talking because I'm sure there are other survivors in this space that may also be triggered at the moment. So I'm sending all of you a lot of love.
And ultimately, I think to the point that we wanted the show to model the kind of community that we want to see, as opposed to the community that always exists in reality, that there is accountability in this space, which there never was, but that there can be in this space. I think it's so powerful. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to try to reset these dynamics in some way on your behalf, if that's all I can do as a supporter of yours. So while we do want to talk about heavy things in this show, we don't want to leave you without a heavy dose of joy. So we're going to go to the two boys in saris next. If you want to just pan over these two walls real quick. And this is always where I like to wrap up. So again, the divine feminine in all its forms is the rejoinder and the response to patriarchal violence. And so here, all of these different objects carry power of that sort. These are the secrets of the universe, the bling goddess, these objects that reflect femininity in its most potent acts and forms. And femininity as being embraced by people with all kinds of bodies. So here are two contemporary drag performers, Faluda Islam and Lahore Bajistan, who carry on the tradition that Bijli and Zain initiated in the early 2000s in a new form. So that ongoing, again, queer generations is a very much important part of this work. And that also relates here to the two boys in saris. So there's the apsaras. I should mention those because those do relate actually to the works, the before Kali works and the works that are in the gift shop, which Jaishri has been making for the museum. And then ultimately we'll wrap here at the two boys in saris. It is actually one of the, again, significant 2018 sculptural works that reflects Jayshri's moving into more of an in the round idea for sculpture, and creating environments where the sculptures will live. So in this space, we wanted to emulate something like a mandap, which is the space in which traditionally people get married. And these are two Australian performers who were at the time a couple who had a podcast that Jaishri used to listen to, reflecting the global scope of South Asian queerness. Do you want to add anything about the two boys?
They had a food truck and they would serve up food and have these amazing spoken word, performance poetry events. And sadly, they've broken up, which is a bit of a tragedy, but they will forever exist in our hearts as two boys in saris for doing what they did.
Wonderful. So again, right, nothing's perfect and maybe nothing lasts forever, but it doesn't mean we can't celebrate it. And celebrating it and celebrating ourselves is actually what this whole show is about. Thank you, Jaishri, for giving us the opportunity to celebrate ourselves and celebrate our community in beauty and joy and fullness and voluptuousness. And again, it's been such a great privilege to get to do this with you. I think we should go to Q&A.
I just want to say that, there are about 120 individual people from our community that are included in the show, in photos and videos and sculpture and painting, and how happy I am to be in community and solidarity with such an incredible community.
And the community has been turning out for the exhibition in force.
Yay.
And in fact, enjoying the fact that they have a physical space to gather in and celebrate themselves for the duration of this show. So we welcome everyone to be in community with us. We're glad you could be here virtually. If you are in the LA Metro at any time between now and May 8th, please do come and enjoy the show in person. There's nothing like just the sheer impact to your eyeballs, to your nervous system of being in this transcendent space. Again, Jaishri, thank you for creating it with me.
I just want to thank you and everyone at Craft Contemporary, from Holly, Andres, Suzanne, Prima, everyone. I mean, it's been a complete dream of a show. I want to shout out to every one of the installers, every one of your amazing student volunteers. I know Karen was watching, who volunteered and helped me out. A special shout out to Ro, who I fell in love with, who made my cloud drawing, who painted the cloud drawing, and to just everyone who's coming and embracing the show. All of the folks who are DMing me with your responses, it makes my day to get them. Any questions from y'all?
I have a question. I can put it in the chat. I don't know what the format you all want to follow.
I think you can go ahead and ask it. That's fine.
Okay. I just wanted to say congratulations. It's such an amazing show, and I think it's so beautifully powerful, Jaishri and Anu, that the work spans both pleasure and pain in such a vulnerable, raw way as it does. I think that is really, truly a gift to everyone. So thank you for that. I guess I wanted to just ask about the alchemy in the work, because I think it's so beautifully operating formally and conceptually. And Jaishri, I think, in terms of the queer community, right, and sort of alchemically, right, every day, habitually, for us, right, we have to show up in that way. And I guess I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to your relationship to alchemy, both artistically and politically.
I'll unmute it when do you want to switch? Okay, yeah.
It's just a space of how do I put this? I mean, it is a daily quest for social justice, isn't it? But at the heart of it, it's just like love. It's just straight up love. It's like looking at everyone who is on the margins as your mirror and folding and kneading every day like dough, like epoxy, the margins to the center, right? And like understanding that the only way that shit is gonna change is if we all fucking make it happen every day, and one of my favorite friends and thinkers, Greg Tate, passed away recently, and I was curating a show on utopias, and I had talked to him about how the hell do I make a show about utopias in the middle of a Trump presidency in 2019. This was before the pandemic. And he talked to me about how he said, Jaishri, utopias have existed in different pockets of time and space, but they haven't been available to everyone. And we can't actually control society, but we can create little utopias, every one of us, in the social networks that we create, right? We all have that power to create a utopia within our life in how we treat people, right? Does that answer your question?
That does beautifully. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we welcome you to join the conversation. Please don't be too dismayed by the weirdness of the wrong frame highlighting, which is weird for me, Zoom protocol wise. But you can use the hand raise function. You can use the chat. You can also just speak. Please, join the conversation. Jaishri and I have been having this conversation, as I mentioned, for many years. And so maybe I'll just tell you a little bit while you figure out what you want to say about how I met Jaishri, because that's often a question that I get asked, which is people assume that because she's been doing this work for so long, and because I've been doing this work for so long, that we must have met each other a long time ago. And actually, that's not really true. I'd certainly heard of her and all her organizing work. But it was in 2016 that we connected and instantly found common ground and started working together. And that's just what she does. She finds people who are like-minded and we get to work. So again, I'm grateful that you brought me into your inner circle. And I know what a privilege it is. And what a delight to be there.
I can't thank you enough. It's been doing this work for 25 years. Tomorrow is Saucy's 25th anniversary of being born. And it's been 12 years since I've had a solo show, and I've never had this much space, time, attention, visibility to myself. I've spent the whole time like making it for other people. And so it feels kind of amazing to be on the receiving end of it. And the fact that you are the curator as another queer feminist South Asian woman, like just, it has been the most dreamy and fantastic of experiences. To have an entire team at the museum that's like queer and feminist has been a fucking dream, So I feel like there's so much about this show that is just like, it had to be the way that it had to be. It had to be at this time, at this place, with these people helping us create it. And I feel really, really like lucky and fortunate that I've been given the opportunity to like share my voice with all of you. It's not been an easy thing to come by in my life.
I want to quickly shout out some of the folks that I see here too from Stop Discrimination. Thank you so much for showing up. I think it's been really informative for those of us who've been organizing with this group, which has been around for under 2 years and really came about in the wake of the anti-Asian rhetoric that Donald Trump was spouting at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the violence that was enacted and continues to be enacted on Asian bodies since that time. For us, it's been a project of learning what we didn't know, which is the history of Asian American organizing preceding that moment, right? So there are all these benchmarks that we often are alerted to our condition as people of color through historical events like the coronavirus pandemic, like 9/11, like the Vietnam War. And yet, because it's not mainstreamed as history, the next generation doesn't even know that it happened. So I think this history lesson is extremely important, and it's one of many that we've been collecting. So thank you too for that. And I think maybe the next step is actually to get an oral history out of you, Jaishri. I'm thinking about that because of the wonderful Satrang show that's at the One Archives here in LA right now. That also has a flyer for Jaishri's very first exhibition with Desh Pradesh in Toronto in 1996. And that show was curated by Aziz Sohail and Lexi Johnson, who really did a wonderful job as well, and Pamela Matharu, who did some fantastic archives work to commemorate Desh Pradesh and Satrang, two organizations that have been rallying queer South Asians for over 2 decades. So I want to give a shout out to those folks as well for all their activism and the history of all this work. So I'm just trying to think, are there any organizations we didn't mention? We mentioned Asian American Writers Workshop. We mentioned Saucy, of course. We mentioned Satrang, formerly Tricone. We mentioned Desh Pradesh, Cholet, right? Who do we need to know about? Who exists and existed that isn't in the record? This is the time. Let's get it in the record.
Yeah, there are so many organizations that came and went and did some amazing work. And the problem is always that, we're not really meant to exist. And so between interpersonal community dynamics, lack of funding, issues with nonprofit structures, and all of those things, keeping the work alive it's a challenge. I can see also that someone has a hand up, and I would love for them.
Yes, Riot, did you have another comment?
I did have another question. I didn't want to take up too much space, but I think I would love to hear. I was just curious if you both could speak about what you sort of learned through the making of this exhibition, just very broadly, if there was something very particularly emotionally or whatnot politically that resonated that you kind of took away from this process together.
Anu, do you want to start?
I learned so much. So I learned a lot about South Asian American queer organizing history that I didn't necessarily know. And interestingly, right, Jaishri mentions that she's been in community with folks since 1992. She's just a few years older than me, but there is actually a gap where that community wasn't immediately apparent or visible or permeable for me a few years later, emerging into my own South Asian queer identity. So I think what I've learned is just more about how truly diasporic, truly disseminated our identities are. And so that's been one thing. And then just, being reminded again of what it can be like when you work with a team who's really living the values that they talk about. I think Jaishri mentioned the difficulties that we have sometimes with nonprofit work. Both of us have extensive careers in nonprofit work and remain committed to the ideas and the values of nonprofits. And at the same time, we have real critiques of how nonprofits are run and what the power dynamics of those organizations are and how they exist in many ways to paper over wrongdoing on a global scale. And so we want to be cognizant of that. I think it's not an accident that we're hearing now about all these Russian oligarchs who are being suddenly forced off of museum boards, right? What were they doing there? What kind of values are we dealing with? And so I do want to point out that Craft Contemporary is in very many ways the little museum that could. It is so hardworking with the most wonderful people, very progressive in its exhibitions, in its staffing, in its values. And I want to make an appeal, that people need to support this museum the way they support the ones that do dealings with oligarchs, because this is where it happens. And if we don't value that, if we only value, the art market values, which we want to obviously participate. I think Jaishri has and continues to participate in the art market, but we don't want to be guided by those values of acquisition and trophy display and moving sometimes ill-gotten money around in tax shelters through the form of artwork. That's not the values of the art world that we want to see. We want to see institutions like this. So, I think the other thing I would just say is that I'm learning more and more that it's a myth that we don't have the capacity to create these spaces for ourselves. We can create these spaces everywhere, and we do, and we will. So that's, I think, the thing I've really taken away.
I actually want to start by also mentioning Sasha Ali, who used to work at Craft Contemporary, an amazing South.
Who started this whole thing, right?
Yes.
By getting me involved with the Craft Contemporary back in 2011.
Yes. And it is, we can trace a direct line from Sasha Ali working at Craft Contemporary, inviting Anu, and then Anu inviting me in. So it's like this beautiful little chain of us South Asian women pulling each other along and benefiting from each other's work. So one of the things I learned, the people I met through doing this was Sasha and her work, and the other folks who I painted as well, from Tansila Ahmad to Arshia Haq to the local councilwoman, like meeting all of these folks and getting to talk to them and getting to know them as I paint them. Those were really amazing kind of new things for me, because in the councilwoman, I got to see a South Asian woman owning her power and impacting, social change on a local level in a very direct way. And I love nothing more than that. The other thing that I learned about, I think, was through all of the volunteers and the installers, like so many amazing queer young people who worked on the show, and like everything that I have dreamt of for my whole life, of like this, like a society of amazing young folks committed to social justice, like surrounded me. So I felt like it was a learning experience to see like these people who manifested and embodied the very principles of the show. And it was interesting to also be in California, because it feels like y'all are on like the precipice of climate change in a much deeper way than we are. And to be surrounded by friends who are like driving electric cars and like thinking about these things, and knowing that there's like these wildfires and droughts and everything that you're facing that we're not facing yet on the East Coast, but we know are coming our way. And so to kind of, it was like looking into the future a little bit as to what is going to come to the rest of us, because we're all in different points of the spectrum of this kind of climate crisis, right? And so there was so much I felt like I'd absorbed that was about the future, and what like who's going to own it, from the young people who worked on the show to like how y'all are living now there, Does that make sense?
So actually, I wonder maybe we could get a close-up on the Nithya Raman painting, because we didn't talk about that one, but Jaishri was just talking about painting our LA City Council person, Nithya Raman, who represents Highland Park, and how exciting it is for us here in LA that we have a South Asian person on the City Council. This is a first for us, and she's progressive. And so, we're very excited to see that seizing of political power again, on the local level, much like Congresswoman Jayapal, and again, they shine us examples against perhaps the disappointment we may feel in Kamala's positions and policies. So there's always that hope of that next generation that builds on. And I think, again, to what we've learned, something I've just been learning through this process and through the quarantine and its aftermath, is that community, that future community, is not always perceptible, but it's very, very real. And that this work is building a better future and giving that permission to people. It's actually the circular one with the elephants at the top. Yeah. So that idea that, that this thing that we're building is actually getting built. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes you don't see it when you're laying the foundation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to have Andres give us a little close up on Nithya Raman real quick. Yeah, I'll move with you so that you can still hear me. Excuse me, I'm attached to the iPad.
Can I also have, after you look at the painting of Nithya Raman, can we also just look at Saba's painting? Because actually that last work, because I finished that one like 2 hours before the opening on that Saturday. And it was a little bit of a mix up because I was trying to paint Saba while I was in Los Angeles, because she lives so close to Craft Contemporary, and I was texting the wrong number, and I kept wondering why she wasn't responding to me. And this one, finally, like I sent her an email the day before the opening with the draft of what I had been making, and she was like, "Oh my God, I love this!" And so she came to the opening, and at 5:30, I met her at Craft Contemporary, and in her hand, she wrote on the painting her text from her short story. So it ended up being the most collaborative of all of the works, and it was hung on the wall at like 5:45. So,
and this is the beauty of working with a living artist, is you have a perfect configuration, and then she adds a piece right before the opening, after the preview. But it was great. And also Saba, shout out to her. She's the director of the UCLA Labor Law Center. And she also had us on her feminist podcast, where she's a guest host recently. So you can check that out as well if you'd like to hear Jaishri and I talk for another hour,
I
or
know,
half an hour or so about this project.
So it turns out that Saba and Sasha Ali grew up together. Their moms were like best friends, and they're both like on that feminist radio collective that they had us on together.
Oh, that's fantastic. So Miss Modular is Sasha's DJ show, and she plays wonderful music from around the globe on that. And so it's on the same station. I hadn't actually realized that. Great. So again, community. Everywhere you look, there's community. And if you can't find it, it finds you. I think that's probably a good place for us to close. So thank you again, Jaishri. Thank you everybody for being here with us today. And again, please come see the exhibition. I'm doing walkthroughs every now and then. So, feel free to reach out if you would like a private tour, and I'll try to make it possible. And please bring your friends, come back again and again. It's up for 2 more months. Thank you, Andres, for organizing today. Thank you, Holly, and everyone at Craft Contemporary for all your wonderful support. Thank you again, everybody, for being here, and enjoy your Sunday.
Hey everyone, thank you all so much for joining us. Just a reminder for those that are still here, if you have the time to come to the museum today, the exhibition is now open. We also have the blacksmithing demonstration happening in their courtyard. We have a punch needle workshop happening next weekend in connection to Diedrich Brackett's exhibition. It's in the 2nd floor. And we also have, next weekend, we also have Roslyn Miles, who's in an exhibition installation in our front window, who's teaching a family workshop in collage making. So please come by the museum, check out all 3 fabulous exhibitions. And thank you all so much for spending some time with us this Sunday, and hope to see you here at Craft Contemporary soon. And thank you to Anu and Jaishri for being here. We really value your time, and thank you so much for such a beautiful walkthrough. And we hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye. And thank you, Holly, who was helping us out with all the back end. There she is. Thank you all so much. You all have a beautiful Sunday.
Thank you so much. Hey, Karen.